Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to this Ask the Trainer session. And today we are going to talk about refractive materials and how to create refractive objects and so on. And I'm joined by our wonderful trainers, Ellie, Darren, Noseman, and Dr. Sussy. And hey, everyone.
Hey.
So,
Hello.
yeah, within the last couple of weeks when we did Ask the Trainer, pretty much all of the questions we received were based on some Cinema 4D topics. So we thought we can use our certification topics list as the way going forward with Ask the Trainer, and we will pick one or two topics of this list and do some sort of a deep dive into these topics. And yeah, let me just show you how you can get to this list. I'm on the Maxon certification site here. It's maxon.net/certification. And if you go to the Cinema 4D Basics Comprehensive Certification and unfold that, you will find out a little bit of what it is about, and you will find this list of certification topics if you click that. So here is the whole list of topics that we defined to be useful for our certifications that people who own companies like to see from artists they who are applying for a job or for freelance gigs and so on. And the one that we picked out today is refractive materials and nested dielectrics and stuff like that. So Thanasis is going to start explaining to you how nested dielectrics work, and then let's see what we're going to do next. Also, prepare your questions because this is supposed to be an interactive session. So if you have any questions, just ask them, and we do our best to answer them. But we would appreciate it if those questions would be on the topic of refractive materials and nested dielectrics. All right, so yeah, Thanasis, your turn. Let's explain the whole stuff.
Hello, everyone. So we've been working with Jonas quite a bit on this lately, and we've distilled this information to some very, very specific rules. Now, if we can share my screen, I want to show you just the result of, I would say, about an hour of work from my part, including the parts, how to explain something, how things work. And this is just a render of a very simple scene. It's just a glass. It's got some wine or, I don't know, pomegranate juice or something like that, bubbles, condensation, and so forth. Now, there are obvious errors, which I'm going to highlight now before I sing my own praises. Some stretching here because I didn't account for the UVs, but as far as the final quality, and if I go to the 100% mark, you'll be able to see the quality of this. Now, having said that, we are not going to deal with the details of this today. So the details are the droplets here and the condensation. And this gives quite a bit of realism to this. We're going to deal with the fundamental principles of modeling and creating simple materials that allow for this to render correctly. That is the objective of this. And this falls under the umbrella of a technique called, not technique, I would say it's a way of working, which is called nested dielectrics. So first of all, I'm going to begin in Cinema 4D over here and show you a very simple setup. I'm going to close Redshift, which you can create and use yourselves to test these principles so you understand how they work. And after I show you how to set up the scene, I'm going to start explaining these things. Now, by the way, just a few minutes ago, a link to Cineversity videos that show these things in detail has been posted. And you can go and watch. It's a 3-video series, and it will explain or everything we're going to talk about today, but we're going to do a quick run through today as well, so we can create any interest and questions and stuff like that. The stuff we're going to talk about are the fundamentals you need to understand if you want to pass the test when it comes to the specific topic of nested dielectrics. And we're going to try and make it as hard as possible for you to figure out a solution. But if you know these things, you will breeze through. So I'm going to do the following thing. I'm going to make a circle spline, and I'm going to lay it on the ground. And I'm going to go and add a extrude. And we have this nice little thing over here. And this is going to be our liquid. The reason I put it here is because I want to go and change its radius to change one of the parameters, but keep the height the same. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is create an outer surface, a glass. And I'm going to do that using a simple tube. And I'm just going to make this a bit smaller. So it's over there. Turn it off temporarily. And let's take the tube and make it quite thick, as you can see right there. And the last thing I'm going to do is turn on, as usual, my lines, set the height segments to 1 and rotation segments to 64. So we have fewer artifacts. I'm going to make it editable. So basically, I'm going to model a very cheap glass, do a loop cut with KL, go to polygons, do a loop selection. And what I'm doing now is one of the tests in the test. So I'm going to go and close polygon hole for the top and close polygon hole for the bottom. And now we have a watertight glass that the normals are facing all outwards. Fantastic. So let's put the liquid in here and go and see what we have. Alt H and take our liquid, go to object mode, and I'm going to make this a bit shorter. Now you would ask me, why did you go through all this trouble? So you may observe in this particular case that we have a gap between the one medium, so this will be the liquid, and another medium, this will be the glass. And I didn't measure this. I'm going to go and select with my move tool the edge. I just want to see what the size of this is, 160 or something. Now, what I've seen through my experience is quite a few mistakes when setting up these sort of interactions. And apparently, what happens is that in order for the renderer, and let's go and create some standard materials here. I'm going to call this glass, and I'm going to call the other one water. And in the glass, I'm going to go and get rid of the diffusion. I don't care about the reflectance, and make this glass and drag it on my tube, which is the glass. And for this, I'm going to do the same thing and go here and let's give it some absorption. Now, in order to colorize liquids, a lot of people go and use this color. That can work, but the correct way is to play with the absorption. So note number 1, I'm going to drag the water on this. And let's go and create a sky object so that it's fun and it looks nice. I'm going to go here and type HDR. And these ones with a round, the preview are just materials. You can drop them on there and you can render. So Control. There we go. And the one thing I always need to do is make sure that in a little note about standard and physical, the reflectance, even though it's off, it has something called transparency here. This is with an asterisk. That means that there is reflection of the transparency. Whether it's on or off, this reflection, these little reflections, are always visible. So go make sure that you set the roughness to 0. Otherwise, it's going to slow down your render, and the default, we're not going to use it. You can go and add more. Now, the majority of things I'm going to say apply for Redshift and standard and physical. Now, what you're seeing here is that we see 2 distinct blocks of materials. You can see they're very sharply defined. That is because these 2 objects are not interacting. As we know from the real world, the liquid touches exactly at the edge of whatever container it's in. And the nested dielectric principle tells us that we need to make sure that these two objects overlap by very little. There's an edge case where they're both the same size. I'm going to do the following thing just to show you what not to do. Here we have a case where we have some places have an overlap, some places don't. And if you render this, you will get a really artifacty situation. In this particular case, it's not extremely visible. But anyhow, it seems that it's penetrating a bit more. In the video, you will see exactly the example. I didn't measure my glass now, so let's go back to the proper technique. It needs to overlap, but only by a little bit. This will give you the perfect interaction between the two objects. Now, if it looks a bit odd now, it's because we have very square faces and all that. But talking about accuracy in this model here, that's precisely the way this has been created. And just to show you, here is the actual file. And if you go here, you will see that this is the amount of penetration we have. So the main rule is if you have interacting dielectric or refractive materials, you need to make sure that their point of contact is defined by a very, very small overlapping between the two objects. So that will be rule number one. And just to make sure that you believe this is the live, what you're seeing here is the live render of what we're doing. And the other thing that a lot of people don't really know is that if your nested dielectrics are not correctly set up, you will get slower renders. Because the renderer has been optimized to use this particular method, everything else will create extra bounces between the two mediums if you're not following these rules. So the simple way to see it, let's go and find, there it is. This is the graphic that shows this, and I'm showing an animation in the video as well. The way this works, and the very quick explanation, is that when a ray is traveling through air, and when I say it's traveling, it doesn't really travel, but it does the calculation as if it's traveling. When it hits a medium, it assesses the normal direction, because the normal direction tells the ray if it's going in an object or coming out of an object. And when it registers a hit with an object that has an IOR in the material, it adds that little IOR to its stack. The ray carries a list, an array of indices of refraction, and it adds the new one. The last one is always the current material we're inside. So when we are here, the renderer knows that we are in a material that has an IOR of 1.5, which exists in the world which has an IOR of 1. This doesn't exist, it's implied, but I put it here just so that you can understand. Now, when it hits that secondary penetrating object, now it's within three mediums, two real ones, the liquid and the glass and the air. But now it considers to have transitioned from the glass into the liquid. That's why we need to make this overlap quite small, because there's a difference. If this edge over here is out here, the transition is going to occur earlier in time. Whereas if it's close to the edge, you won't see any visual artifacts. And by using an example similar to this, you'll be able to test it out. If I take the circle and I make it quite bigger, you will see a different render. Whereas if I make it just slightly overlapping, you will see a different render. And you can do these tests. You can see here we have sort of a seamless transition. So, and I'm explaining throughout the video how these principles apply. When it exits a material, because it hits the glass on the opposite side, but it's not in the glass, right? Remember, it's in the liquid. So it removes that sort of reminder from the list that, oh, you were in the glass, but it doesn't do anything because it wasn't the active index of refraction, the 1.3. And it continues straight. If it finds another object, it adds it to the list, moves to that object. If it finds another object, it adds that to the list and moves on, and then it exits that object. And because the exit happened on the active IOR, the 1.0, then it will calculate a bend. All these bends are calculated using something called Snell's law. It's a simple mathematical formula, which I've linked some papers and some explanations in the video description. And it goes on and on and on. There's a small difference when it comes to the other side. It will enter the glass medium a bit earlier than it entered the, sorry, a bit later than it entered the glass. So in theory, the liquid is going to be shifted somewhat. So, but this, if I do a doodle, so let's go to doodle, paint. Why can't I see paint? Doodle frame, clear doodle frame. I'm going to go to my tools and get the doodle, and there we go, doodle paint. So the shape you're going to have is this. So it's going to go down here, but it's going to have this shape. That's a shape, but you can't see that when you're doing the render. It's not obvious, and yes, it will render correctly in the end. So let's talk about nested bubbles. All right. Now, I used to do this mistake, and when I had an ice cube and I wanted some bubbles inside, I would actually create a single model and I would revert the normals of the cube. Of the bubble inside, because if this is ice and this is air, because it exits the medium, it's going to render properly. But if this is submerged in water, and that's one of the problems now, if you submerge this in water, then and even better, if you're fully submerged into water, when you exit the ice, you're not in the air, you're in the water. Because the ray came in, it became water, then it became ice, then it comes out of the ice, it becomes water. So these are not going to render correctly if it's submerged in water. So if you want a solution that allows you to create bubbles inside mediums and follow the nested dielectric rule, what you need to do is create your little bubbles as separate objects and create a separate material which has an IOR of 1, so that the normals are pointing outside. And when it enters this, it enters a new medium that has an IOR of 1 instead of exiting the 1.6 in a cavity. And that allows us to have even bubbles that are half submerged. It works fine. And again, I have some examples in the videos you can go and see. Now that we've done this overview on how the IORs are calculated to get the most accurate result and physically plausible, let me turn your attention to some mistakes that happen. So I don't know if any one of you have had this problem. You render a car, and for some reason the car acts like a big lens. Look at those little things in here. The seats are distorted. You have some weird, the dash is massive and all that. And that's because in this particular case, I'm actually using single-sided polygons. And I can go and solo these and go to my polygon mode. And you can see that these are single-sided, so front and back. So what happens is if a ray hits one side of the car, what you see coming from the other side, it bends once, then travels all the way to the other side and bends as it's exiting the car, and makes this seem that you filled up your car with glass. It's solid in here. There are two solutions which are going to allow me to show you one of the material settings. One solution is to go and add physical thickness to the glass and make these double-sided polygons with an inside and an outside. The other solution is actually based on a material parameter. So I've applied this glass default here. And I'm going to bring in my material, and I want you to pay attention to this. If you go to the Redshift material and set it to thin-walled, immediately we lose that effect. And thin-walled, which is also called architectural glass, is a very simple way of creating materials which have transparency, IOR, but they don't take into account refraction. So you can use them for building, so you don't have to make double-sided polygons. And it does render faster because it avoids one series of actually not one, but the entry and the exit of an object. It does just goes through and calculates no ray bending. The other way you can do this, which is, it needs a few more clicks, is to disassociate the IOR of the reflection from the IOR of the refraction, because this is to have proper energy conservation and physically plausible materials. But if I unlink the reflection in the refraction transmission and set it to 1, I'm going to get the same effect as the thin walled. So this would is another way of doing it. So you have 3 solutions for this, but make sure that when you have single-sided polygons, you have to deal with it. Otherwise, you're going to have very odd types of renders. And the same principle applies if you have not a car, but even a glass, a simple glass. You need to add that thickness to create the outer polygon of your glass. And there's a detailed explanation of this. So the other mistake is normals, and let me find my file that talks about normals. Well, it's not here. Let me go and open it for a second, and let's go in where are my normals. Any questions? I'm going to check in a second. Oh, yeah, I've got a million files here. I'm going to do it live. Let me see if we have any questions. There's a file here that has any questions. If someone has any question to ask me so I don't.
So Peter had one question, and he asked if you can talk about the trace depth setting in Redshift.
Exactly. That's a very good question. And let me see, the best file to show it is this one here. So let's address the questions, because this is something I was going to show anyway. So this is this glass here without the condensation and all that. And by default, let's go to the globals and just set these to their default value. And this is what you would get if you use correct materials, correct nested dielectric setup, but limited trace depths. So what are trace depths? Let's go to the top view here. And now imagine the entry of the glass. Let me get my tools, my doodle paint. So here's what we have. The ray comes in here and strikes the glass, and that's 1 hit. Then it goes in and it strikes the liquid. That's 2. Then it exits the glass. That's 3. Then it hits the eyes. That's 4. Then it hits the entry of a bubble. 5. Then it hits the exit of a bubble. 6. Then it hits another bubble. 7. Then exit another bubble. 8. Then hits the outer part of the eyes. 9. Then goes to the entry point of the glass. 10. Then goes to the exit point of the liquid. 11. And then exits the glass. 12. So the ray, in order to go through and we didn't add these bubbles and all other possible interacting objects. And obviously you see these numbers here, the refraction can only calculate up to 6 depths based on the settings. And because these settings have been set for performance issues, and you can see this if you get a cloner and you create 100 cubes that are not overlapping, and you make them glass and you look through them, you won't see the end of it, because by the time you've gone through 3 of those 100 cubes, you've exhausted your maximum possible interactions. And this is what is the trace depth, and they exist for transparency combined, which is when we add these two. So watch what happens as I'm increasing, and this is one of the ways you're going to use to optimize your render time. So first of all, do we care about reflections? At this particular point, I don't really care. I'm going to leave it at 4. Refractions, though, we had 12. So let me take this and let's raise it, first of all, to 8. And let's go to 12. Let's go to 128. 63 is the maximum. Nothing changed, and that's because of this combined number. Regardless of how much you raise these things, if their sum 4 plus 63, we won't get 63 interactions. We can get a maximum of 6. So let's go back to 8 here, and let's make sure that this one at least has 12, which is the sum of those two, and immediately the rays can go through. So this, I've seen artists struggle to get that light to come through their refractive materials, and they go to the material and they change the parameters and all that, when in fact it's trace depth. And this applies to Cinema 4D standard renderer. Just in case you don't know where it is, you just go to your options and you find it here, ray threshold, and the ray depth and the reflection depth and the shadow depth, right? Slightly different, but basically these are the same, the equivalent settings. So let's go back to my render settings and continue. But you can see it's not perfect yet. We're getting a lot of blackness here, and that's because when Jonas was modeling this, he's added a lot of detail to this. There's a lot of polygons that overlap. So then you can go the other way around. Let's go 10 and 10 and 20, and suddenly you're starting to get the rays going through, and you can push it much higher. Let's say 22 and 22 and I don't know, 50, whatever. At a certain point, you will see that it doesn't really offer any visual advantage. So you can start cutting down rays until you see something changing that will make it look worse. And there you go. So that red thing here that appears somewhere here, red, and one less, it's gone. So it's up to you as artists to art direct what parts, because honestly, I don't like these red things. I don't care if they exist in our HDR, but this is the way to control this. So that is all I have to say at this point for the reflection refraction depths, the trace depths, but it's one of the most important parameters in order for you to be able to create proper, complex, nested dielectrics. So I hope that answered your question. Let's see. Do you have any other questions? Anyone?
Since you are there, Logan asked if there is a way to set ACEs to be off by default.
We talk about,
I wanted to answer that later, but you can just adjust the rendering color space and the view, and then show where to save the scene as the default scene, which will do the trick.
Oh,
I can also do it.
You can show that if you want. It's in the globals of the render settings. If you don't want ACEs, you change this to working space 709, Rec 709. You set this to untone mapped, and as far as I know, linear. Sorry, where's my scene linear? Yeah, Rec 709 and untone mapped, and basically that will be your traditional one. Yeah, you can show the default scene. Show it. It's around here. Save as default scene. That's it.
Cool.
Yeah. Anything else I missed?
Nope. That's
reset to default and reset to default. I'm still trying to get my head around, wrap my head around the ACEs and the color management. I'm trying to follow the rules I set in some of the tutorials I'm preparing and all that. That's why I make tutorials, so I can follow them and remember what I was thinking of. And yeah, you just
that happens.
Benefit.
We trainers, we also cannot keep all of the nice little secrets that we put into tutorials at some point. So we end up watching our own tutorials to remember what we did back then.
Of course. So let's check normals very quickly. So this is something I've been doing quite often. I've been modeling glass objects. And let's go move. Let's do that. And let's control click. And this is a glass. Yeah. Lord save us here. And let's go over here and do that and undo. Select this, just zero it out. Now I'm going to select all, right-click, and create outline. And there you go. I'm going to go and delete this point over here. Boop. Boop. It's interesting how these noises happen when I erase things or move things around. And let's go to...
They are also pretty random. On my side, they are completely different, but they are there as well.
And I'm going to take this point and set it in the point order as first point. Now, this is a very, very, very important thing for everyone to understand how the splines wind, either clockwise or counterclockwise and all those kind of things. That's part of understanding how the spline workflow works. So now I'm going to open it. You can see I've got a gap here, and I'm going to rotate this and scale it down and just move it down to create that nice little cavity, and remove this. And this is ready for lathing. So let's lathe this, and I have my beautiful glass here. Now, let's go and see one of these problems. I'm going to go and create a redshift material. So let's first of all go and set this as a redshift render, always advanced. I'm just going to leave it. I'm not going to change anything else. I'm going to go and add a light and a dome light. If you exclusively use Redshift, you can go and save a dome light and a few other things as a default scene, so you don't have to do this. I enjoy doing it. I don't know what's wrong with me, but that's a different story. Download assets. Come on, there you go. So we have that. And now let's go and create a Redshift material. Let's put it on this, and let's double click and go to the material settings and set it to glass. And there we go. Nice. Now, someone tell me, this looks wrong, doesn't it? I've done the double-sided, and it doesn't look like glass. It looks like
wrong.
bad ray tracing.
So wrong.
Yeah, the reason for this is the following. I'm going to take this and paste it in a new scene. Paste it. And I'm going to get rid of the material. I'm going to make it editable. And I'm going to go to polygon mode. So there's my polygon mode. And I'm going to select all. And the normals are reversed. Now, this is a little quirk. Maxon is aware of it, and I think they're going to remedy it at some point. That when you use lathe or something like that, by definition, whatever spline you use, whatever winding you use, the normals are going to be reversed. Just go to the lathe and flip your normals. And let's render this one more time. Or we can go to the render view. And now this looks like a glass. Look at the difference. And if you're not aware of this, you're going to create glass that doesn't look good. So make sure your normals are oriented. Now the question would be, and how would I know if my normals are oriented? And there are a few methods. One highlighted by Jonas. I'll let him deal with that later. For me, the solution is you go and create a redshift material, which again should be part of your scene. And you go and you add a switch node. The switch node is the ray switch, is an extremely powerful node, that a utility node that allows you to get some information about the surfaces. One of them is the enable front back, which is basically if which is the normal direction. So remember in Cinema 4D, the orange is the front facing and blue is the back facing. So I've just set the same colors and just put it in the output. You don't even have to put it through a material. Now, if I drag this material on my object, if it's orange, it's all cool. If it's not orange, it's not cool. So this is a very quick way, and it's one of those utility materials you need to have in your default scene so you can very quickly do your troubleshooting to make sure that nothing is going wrong. So if you want to do the same thing very quickly in Cinema 4D, you just go and add a color from the effects, a normal direction, which again is the front-facing color 1 and the back-facing color 2, and you apply it to your object. And I think if I do this here and turn off, well, now it's got the redshift material. So anyway, that's how it's going to work. And you see, again, you put your two colors and you can see it in your viewport, and even use that as a shader to do other fancy things. So normals. absolutely important, very, very important when you are creating dielectrics. They need to face the right direction. This is a point where standard and physical are slightly different than redshift in the fact that standard and physical is very forgiving. When they were developing it, they made it work regardless of how the normals are facing for most cases. So things that used to work in standard and physical, if your normals are wrong, if you do that in Redshift or any other third-party renderer, the normals are very strictly followed. So make sure that you don't get carried away by the ease of use of standard and physical, and apply the proper normal direction to your objects.
Sorry to interrupt,
Yes.
Noseman, but someone just asked a question about, every time they add a PBR material, it's, so grainy and bumpy, and they just can't find where to go to fix that. Can you show the, in the physical render settings, sample counts, so that we can just...
Oh, you're talking about standard and physical, not Redshift.
Yes.
Let me
I'm
turn
sorry. I thought you said physical render. I was answering questions.
So,
Thank you.
PBR material?
Yes. So
What exactly are we trying to see? If you can repeat.
so
Well,
the question,
go
go
ahead.
on, Darren.
Yeah, so it just tends to look very grainy because the default sample count is low. So where do we go to increase that sample count? With the standard renderer, it's actually right here. Thanasis has it open. It says sampling subdivisions right where his cursor is. But if you're using the physical renderer, and I'm going to mute my mic.
Excellent. So a standard renderer, it does the PBR stuff sort of on a different layer. So you can go and define the samples for each material. And you go down here. So in the reflective channel of the PBR, you go down to the bottom. Let me close everything else so it's nice and clear. Open the layer sampling. And in here you have the minimum, maximum samples, and play around with these. I think there's some excellent tutorials by Patrick Goski that deal with the reflectance channel that talks about all these parameters. So for standard renderer, these are the settings. For physical render, if I go here and send it to physical, the sampling subdivisions grays out because now these samples are controlled in the physical tab over here. So you start by just using one of the presets, and then you go in and out and start fiddling around with these to get a much cleaner render. So just to let you know, the higher these samples are, the physical render has a speed advantage over it. Whereas for lower samples, then standard still renders much faster. But this is the difference, that as far as standard render is concerned, you go to the layer sampling, and if this is set to standard, you set your sampling subdivisions. If your render is set to physical, you go to the physical tab and you play around with these. And again, go on Cineversity, search for physical render or PBR material. It's a tutorial by Patrick Goski, and it has an owl. And he explains every single detail about these things, especially for standard and physical. There's quite a bit of information there. Hope this answers your question.
I think so, definitely. So,
let's see if I have anything else to say quickly here. The low trace depth, the inverted normals, the single-sided polygons, the nested dielectrics, the bubble, and all that. And yes, those are the principles you need to follow to create properly interacting nested dielectric objects. Let me see if I have any scene here which is interesting. Oh, I do have something here. Let me see if I can. So this is a side view of a how you would create and basically this is how I've created this glass over here, this one over here. The principle I've followed is that we have the glass, we have the liquid, all the bubbles, I'm using a cloner just to clone some spheres in different places. This is you don't need to cut out the ice, you don't need to do booleans, you don't need to do these things. If you want to perfect your fluids. You can use some maybe ambient occlusion to calculate the distances between when you're close to here to create a little bump, because that's what happens. You can model this to have a bump sloping outwards, and usually water is not totally flat. It has a little, especially in smaller areas. And just by adding all those little teeny weeny little details, which I didn't, to be honest with you, this is quite simple. And these files are available, not the one with the condensation, because that's still a work in progress, but the glass that doesn't have the condensation is available for you to download if you follow the link in the Cineversity tutorial. I have a beer bottle as well, and you will get a very good idea how these things are set up. And let me think if I had anything else to say about this. Doobie. No, I think I'm done.
You pretty much covered it all. I couldn't think of anything that you left out, as always.
Thank you.
You did your job quite well here.
Any questions?
So,
do we have any questions from the panel?
We had a few, but we already answered many of them. Let me see.
I can say something else.
Good, do it.
Okay, let's do it. Just in case someone asks, before you ask, when you're creating any materials that have IOR and dielectrics, would you mind sharing my screen? Thank you very much. So what I'm getting a bit of a delay, so my thank you very much must have been delayed by 10 seconds. So the good thing about this method is that if you're using the single scattering subsurface, it actually works really nicely with the nested dielectrics. If you use the multi-SSS, it does not work. The multi-SSS is based on the diffusion channel. And it's sort of a fake. It changes the colors of the surface. It's not meant to be used with materials that have an index of refraction and transparencies. Now, maybe there is an edge case where you can combine something if you have partial transparency and all that. I haven't tested it, but the multi-SSS relies 100% on the diffusion color. So, and that doesn't really participate in the nested dielectric calculation. So if you start using absorption, when your scatter scale is 0, the absorption here works just like in your standard Cinema 4D material in the transparency channel, just like the absorption over here. It's different parameters, different types of attributes, but this is how you create a colorized liquid. So with scattering 0, it's going to be nice and clear, but light, certain colors are going to be either allowed to pass through, that's the transmittance, and or some colors are going to be extinct, and that's the extinction. That's why when you set a color here, you get the complementary color on the other side. But to make a short story long, as some people say, the subsurface, the single scatter subsurface, works with nested dielectrics as far as I've seen, and it doesn't produce any problems. I think
that's
I'm done,
great.
and until of something else.
That's great. So yeah, next I can show you how to model and set up some nice little ice cubes. So what you see here, that's my After Effects, and the ice cube that you see here is a pretty simple setup that you can create that is very effective in terms of photorealism. So I also have this one where it's rotating like a nice little turntable, and you can see that it's holding up pretty well, and it's also quite simple to create. So one thing that you already see here is that it's all about the details. It's about the details here in the surface. It's about the details on the inside, and those are actually the really important ones because of the refraction, they do look so interesting, and yeah, just do what will happen in reality. So let me jump to Cinema 4D, and here I have a scene that's already been set up. So Redshift is the renderer, and I adjusted my trace depth and so on. So I want to start modeling this ice cube, and I'm gonna use just a simple cube for that. Little fun fact here: when I did some research on like how can I some look development research for ice cubes. I searched for ice cube, and everything that showed up were images of the musician, the rapper. So if you want to get the reference images, you have to search for ice cubes, plural. That's important. Otherwise, you can model a musician or something. Cool. So what I want to do here is I want to adjust the subdivisions of the cube to be quite high like that. And I'm also going to add some fillets and make them bigger and also subdivide them a little bit more, because in the end I want to actually distort the surface a little bit using a displacer. So from here, I'm just going to hit make editable, and I'm going to select some points here. So I will have a look at the side view, and using the rectangle selection, I'm going to select these points here, and I'm going to use the scale tool and adjust the modeling axis to be down here at the lower row, and then I'm going to scale this guy down to something like that. So what I'm doing here, or what I'm trying to recreate, is if we have a look in perspective view. So this is the shape of the, is it called tray, where you just freeze the water in your freezer?
Yeah.
I think so, yes. Okay, and here it's the other way around, because you have this surface tension of water that's always like crawling up the walls a little bit. So that's why I did that. And for a nice little reflection up here, I'm also going to go to edge mode, and I'm going to use the loop selection tool, select this edge, and then I'm going to use the bevel tool and bevel this just a little bit, and also increase the subdivisions so that we have something like this. Okay, so that's our base shape here. The next thing I want to do is I want to taper this so that it's a little bit thinner at the bottom. So what I do is I select the cube, and then I go to the deformers menu, use a taper. I hold down Shift as I create it, because this will automatically make a child of it, create it as a child of the cube. And now I'm going to rotate it, hold down Shift to snap to 5-degree angles so I can rotate it exactly by 180 degrees. I'm going to bring down the curvature and bring up the strength to something like, let's say, 20%. So I'm quite happy with this one. And the next thing is I want to, as I said before, I want to distort the surface a little bit. So what I do is I go to my deformers and choose a displacer. I'm going to place it right next to the taper, or beneath, well, in the ice cube. Let's call it ice cube. So here we go. Yeah, and I'm also going to go to the shading tab and add some noise. And now you can see that the surface has been distorted. So now I'm going to bring up the global scale a little bit more to something like that. And now if we go back here and switch back to the object tab, you can see that although it's looking quite promising here on those surfaces, we're getting problems here in the area that has been beveled. So what I want to do is I want to restrict that noise here to the area the inverted area of that edge up here. So how can I do that? I'm going to select the cube and deactivate those deformers. And I'm going to use the loop selection tool again. I'm going to select one of the loops up here. And then I go to Mesh, Edge to Spline. So I'm going to create a spline out of this edge selection. Cool. And now I can use this spline in the displacer in the Fields tab to mask the effect of this deformer. So I'm just going to throw it in here. And I have to set it up a little bit. So the distance mode needs to be radius. So now you can see that everything is flat except for the bevel, the beveled edge here. That's distorted. So we need to invert, and we can do that in the remapping tab. Let's scroll down a little bit, invert, and here we go. And crank up the strength here, and we'll only distort the bigger planar surfaces here. So I'm just going to add a tiny little bit, and that's also one of the details that you will notice once you camera about a refractive object. It is really nice to have this little detail, those little distortions in the surface, because it will always add realism. Okay, so now we finished the outside.
A very quick interjection. The bumps actually create nicer caustics as well, if you decide to add caustics. Thank you.
That's true. Okay, cool. So the next thing I'm going to do is I want to take care of the insides here. So first of all, I'm going to set this ice cube in the basic tab to X-ray so we can have a look through it. And I'm also going to connect objects and delete so that everything is baked into that object. Cool. Great. So let's start with the stuff that we need to have here on the inside. There are 3 components that I added to achieve this result here. One is spherical bubbles. The next one is stretched bubbles. And those stretched bubbles, I guess that they always will be created when there is a bubble and it starts freezing, and then it's starting to freeze around that bubble from the outside to the inside, and that's how these stretched bubbles appear. And then another thing that you can see here, if you have a look at this area, is that there is some sort of crack in here. So we're also going to create that one. Well, I have one eye on the clock. Maybe we will leave those cracks out. So yeah, let me jump back to Cinema 4D and just fill this cube with nice little bubbles. So first of all, we need a bubble. That's going to be a sphere. And the sphere is supposed to be really small. Let's go with a size like that. And now we're going to clone it using a cloner. And these are the bubbles. Yeah. And I switch the mode to be object mode. And now it's asking for an object. I'm going to throw that in. I'm going to set it to render instances and the distribution to volume. So now those bubbles will be created inside of this volume. So I'm going to set it to 1000. So now we have 1000 bubbles in here. Usually I would now also randomize them in size, but we're going to skip that so that I can show you how I created those stretch bubbles. So in order to create those stretched bubbles, I again created a sphere, made it really small, and then I made it editable and just stretched it. So it's as simple as that. I have to be in model mode to do that. And now I'm going to stretch it to something like this. And I'm also going to move its axis, its pivot point, to this side here. All right, now I'm going to leave an edit axis mode, and I'm going to do pretty much the same as with the bubbles. So let's just make a copy of that cloner, throw the sphere inside, and in here I'm going to bring down the count to, let's say, 200, and I'm going to adjust the seed as well. So now we have these MoGraph clones inside of the volume of the ice cube, but they are all pointing towards Z direction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an effector with the cloner selected, target effector, and this will make sure that all of these bubbles are pointing inwards, because that's also the direction that these bubbles would freeze. If you need this to be somewhere else, you can also shift it away from the middle by just moving the target effector, because by default objects or clones that have been affected using a target effector will always point towards the axis of the effector. And now I'm also going to add some random. Let's just go with the random effector. And in here, parameters tab, I'm going to switch off position, and I'm going to enable scale and set it to 1.5 by 1.5 way. Those stretch spheres will be randomized in size, non-uniform way. Okay, so that's already looking cool and quite promising. So now let's add two materials, and I'm going to create like a, and Redshift is my active renderer. That's why I can do this. And in here, I'm just going to set this material node to water. Where is it? Water. And then I go down here until I see the index of refraction, which is set to 1.33. And the index of refraction of ice is a little bit lower. It's that. So whenever you don't know an index of refraction, a good way to find that out is to create a standard material, to double click it, and then you go to the transparency section and just have a look at the refraction presets. And here, down here, you can see that there is water and there is water ice. So if you choose that, you get that number. Cool. So that's our ice. So we can add that to the ice cube. Oh, it already has been added. Cool. And the next material that I'm going to create is air. So as Thanasis pointed out earlier, we need another material with the index of refraction of air, which is 1, because otherwise if we just created like an object with bubbles inside and inverted normals, and this ice cube would then be inside of the water, we would have the index of refraction of water inside of the bubble instead of air. So that's why we are doing this. So here's my air, and there are two ways how you can do that. The easy one would be to go down here and just switch the index of refraction to 1. But the physically more accurate one would be to go down to the refraction and transmission settings and untick this little checkbox, which is called link to reflection. So we're going to unlink the refraction settings or the IOR settings from the reflection. And in here, we can set this IOR to 1. So now we have the index of refraction for reflections of ice and for the refractions of 1. That's air. Okay, and now we can simply add this material to the bubbles and to the other bubbles as well. And let's have a look. We need a dome light, so let's create a dome light, and let's also search for an HDR texture. I'm gonna use this one, and I'm gonna saturate it or desaturate it a little bit and bring up the intensity. And now let's think about it. We can hit render. So let's have a look. So that's not too bad. One thing that would be nice is if we would have a little bit, or if we would have a little bit more, yeah, a detail in the surface. So what I'm going to do is in the ice material, and I'm going to stop the IPR, I'm going to add some variation here. So the easiest way to do that is by hitting the plus button here and then type in noise or Maxon, because I'm going to use the Maxon noise. And I'm going to set this to solo. Now let's start the IPR again and let's have a look. So it's looking like this, and that's not what I want. So let's have a look through all of the noises. You can do that using the arrow up and down keys, and you can go through them until you find something that you like. I think I like this one. And I'm going to increase the overall scale to 3 or maybe 4. Well, I think 3 is better. Like so. And now I'm going to use that as our map, as the map for refraction as well as bump. That was wrong. I'm going to use it as a roughness map and the bump. So let me set the black value to something that is a little higher than black, because I want the roughness value to be at least a little bit there. There needs to be a little bit of roughness. So let's set this one to 2, and we'll keep the other one at white. And now we're going to pipe this into the reflection roughness. And I'm also going to pipe the very same texture into a bump map node, and then pipe that into the overall bump here. Okay, so let's have a look at the result. It's a little bit too rough for my taste. So what I'm also going to add is a ramp node. I'm going to use the Alt input, and I'm going to set this gradient. Well, first of all, there's a little pitfall here. So whenever you're using a ramp, like in a Cinema 4D node material here, this is always a smooth ramp. So if you want this to use, if you want to use that for remapping, it might be a good idea to switch the interpolation of all knots to be linear. All right, and now I'm going to, well, set this lower one again to 2 and just bring it in a little bit. And this way we should get some more areas where we can better look through that ice, and maybe also decrease the height scale here a bit to something like that. So now you can see that we have areas in our ice cube that are like blurrier when it comes to refractions, and some that are less blurry. And if we rotate our view around this ice cube here, maybe let's also go to the dome light and maybe deactivate the background. Can we see it better now? No, we can't. So yeah, that's what I did to create that ice cube. The last thing that I added were some planes that I distorted, and also then added a cloth surface generator to it to add a tiny little bit of thickness. And I added another air material to that. And that's how you can get there. And also another thing that I did, you can see that there are some, that these edges up here are distorted. Maybe you can see that better here. Yeah, here you can see that the edges are distorted. And I did that by using the very same spline that I created from that edge selection and cloned other stretch spheres onto that spline. And then I subtracted it from the main object here using Booleans. So that's pretty much it. And are there any questions for now? I know that we already overran, but we can take 1, 2, or 3 questions until we wrap up, or before we wrap up. Hello.
Logan is wondering if there's anything that we can do to impress you.
Well, to impress me, you don't have to.
There's some. I'm looking over the chat.
So what you can do, here's a challenge. If you like challenges.
Yes.
I want to see the best rendering of a glass with a fluid in it and some nice ice cubes. So here's the challenge. This is what you can do to impress me. Yeah, share it on Twitter or on social and tag me or the Maxon team, and
that's a good one.
That will impress me, but nothing else.
There's a question about the ramp. When you set that ramp to linear, do you have to do the same in the espresso-based equivalent?
I just checked, and it doesn't appear to be the case. So the ramp by default, I'm looking at it right now, seems to be set to linear if you're using it in the espresso nodes, in the shader graph.
I just saw that we have ice cube on our on our trainers.
Yeah, we got it.
Love it.
Too bad we couldn't drop them in with iced tea.
Yeah. Let's try that for the next time.
Must have been busy.
If you want to have a quick question, Peter asked if you could explain maybe when you have a mirror, you have a silver area, a glass plate in front, and there's some game into it. You look through the glass, there's some refraction, double reflection, and all of that. My answer in the chat was that use just a cube and use selection on polygons, so you have 2 materials on one object to keep it simple.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you have any better idea or
no
something? Okay.
That's exactly what I just wanted to show. So yeah.
Sorry to take that away.
No. All good.
Perfect.
So yeah, just create a cube and then create a selection for the backside once you've made it editable. Like so, and then we go to, did you know that if you hit the V key, you get this global menu, which is really cool, and you have the select menu in there, can store selections. So that's the actual mirror, and now I'm gonna reverse the normal. Where do we have it? Reverse normals, because we're gonna look at it from here. So yeah, and now you just need one fully reflective material and another one that's glass, and you put one on the whole cube and the real reflection, the real mirror one on that selection, and then you should have it in theory.
In any case, if you don't want to make your object editable, you can just have a cube, make a plane behind it, make the plane slightly intersect the cube, and you can use that as a reflective material.
Yeah, let me double check. You could maybe also
use a cube and harvest only the selection and then put it back to the primitive again.
Exactly, that's what I just tried. Oh, you cannot do that by copying and pasting, but no, cannot go forward now. Okay, cool. So let's select this guy again. store selection, I'm going to create another cube and just move that selection over to this one. And now, yeah, let me just create one PBR material here, and let's set it to red. Of course, it's a PBR material. That's why we have to go to the reflectance channel, diffuse, and here we have to adjust the color. And I'm just going to throw it on the material, on the object, restricted to the selection. Here it is. So that's also how you could do it. But this only works as long as you keep the poly count intact. So as soon as you increase the segments here, it won't work anymore.
And there could be a capsule maybe helpful as well.
Yeah, I mean, in Redshift there are several ways how you can use one side of an object. One option would be to use the triplanar node. Another option would be to use the state node and output the normal, and then use a vector to scalars to split off the different axes. That's actually the way I prefer, because you can more easily select one face. The triplanar node always selects or always masks one direction and the opposite. And
have you ever tried to use the race switch on one object? So that in the moment.
No, I didn't, to be honest. Okay. Right.
Hey, Jonas, there's another quick question. This, I don't know, it's probably been a while since any of us have done this, but you know, the pop-up menu with V?
Yes.
Can you show how to customize that?
Oh, I never did that, but I assume that it's somewhere in here. There was the menu manager. Was it the menu manager? There is some place where you can. Oh, here it is. So this is the menu manager, and this allows you to customize those things. And here's the M global pop-up, and I think that it's this. So if I change anything in here or add something, it will appear here in my global menu.
Thank you. Perfect.
Great. So unless are there more questions? Anything you didn't reply to in the chat?
Am I allowed to do my plug? Oh, sorry, Doctor.
I was making a joke. I think Ice Cube has a question. He was so quiet the whole time.
Yeah.
I just want to plug my own details. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's @NosemanGR, and you can post any questions there, or ideally you post them. You ask the Maxon training team, because the more you ask, the more we can direct replies to your questions and populate future shows with things of interest. So yeah, feel free to communicate with us and ask us questions. There are quite a few channels. And
so yeah, I'm can you share my screen again, please? So what exactly? So thank you. If you want to pick out, or if you want to learn more about one of these topics here, just, well, it's a good idea to go through this list anyways, because if you know so much about Cinema 4D, or even if you don't know so much about Cinema 4D, it's always easy to know what you know, but it's important. It's impossible to know what you don't know. So go through that list and unfold some of these accordions. And we have, well, some of these entries are populated with links, either to the online help of Cinema 4D or to some video quick tip or whatever. So go through that list and let us know if you want to learn more about one of these topics. The list is quite complete. And yeah, just let us know so we can cover any of those topics in one of the future sessions. And also keep in mind that this is the topics list for the Cinema 4D user certification. So if you are interested in that, this list would be the first place to go if you're interested in becoming a certified artist. All right. So the last thing that I want to share here is we love that you are here, and we want to thank you for that. Not just with words, but also with giving away free T-shirts. So there is a link. It should be in the chat right now, and also a coupon code that you can use to enter this shop, and then you can, just pick the T-shirt that you want to have, and you will get it for free. You will only have to pay for the shipping, and that's pretty much it. I think we can use that to wrap up. I want to thank everyone. Thanks, Thanasis, for explaining the whole basic stuff, or all of the basics of refractions and nested dielectrics so well. Thanks, Ellie. Thanks, Darren. Thanks, Sassi. And also, you didn't see them, but thanks, Michelle, for having an eye on the chat in the background. And also, thanks to Hashi for producing this show in the background. That's all we have. Thank you for attending, and see you next time, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.